Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be keeping the doors open because we're looking forward to an absolute flood coming in. Great to see Keith Anderson just arriving. Thank you, Keith, and thank you for your phone call earlier. I'm Judith Patton, and I'm very proud of this event. All Energy is now in its 16th show, a far, far cry from the event that I created back in Aberdeen in the year 2001, when 350 people battled through the snow to come to it, and we had about 50 speakers. We claimed 50 exhibitors. Some of them just had a poster on the wall. Now, this year, we have some 400 exhibiting companies as main stand holders or sharers. We have 120 hours of presentations. We have over 450. We sort of gave up counting at 450 speakers in 10 parallel sessions and 3 quick-fire seminar theatres on the show floor. It really is quite some event. Before I go any further, though, let me give you the housekeeping. It's one of those events when, obviously, no fire alarms are expected. Should anything go off, then please follow the green men, which you'll see well signed, and take advice from the SECC team, who will make sure that you are safely taken to the assembly point. Can I ask you also to switch your phones to silent? Do feel free to tweet. Our hashtag is @allenergy, no hyphen. We love our hyphen, but it's not in our hashtag. Tweet to your heart's content. I would like to say a big, big thank you to all our supporting organisations. Whilst you sat here, you will have seen the slides with details of our supporting organisations, our sponsors. I'd like to thank in advance all our 460-odd speakers. I don't mean that they're odd, but as I said earlier, I stopped counting around about 460. All our exhibitors, all our visitors, journalists, everybody. It's your show now. And it is quite some event. I know some of you are exhibiting, so we'll have already had a good old prowl around from early this morning to see the other stands. And even those of you that are here as visitors, I hope, will have had a good look around once we'd opened this morning at 8:30. With your help, and so many of you have helped, we've created an event which we hope you will use to the full, to do business and to network. And on the networking front, I hope that you all will follow the sound of our incredible piper, Ian Todd, and go over to the Glasgow Science Centre this evening for our giant networking event. You'll realise that this year we have no government ministers, not surprisingly, because tomorrow is election day. I feel sure that normal service will be resumed next year, but it's rather lovely to have apart from the leader, a non-political lineup. I'm now going to hand over to Nina Skorupska, Chief Executive of the Renewable Energy Association, who will be chairing this session. She's got a particularly exciting week this week, not only because she's chairing this and a bioenergy session, but on Friday, she's going to go to somewhere rather special. She's off to Buckingham Palace for the investiture to collect her CBE. Many congratulations, Nina. Without more ado, I'd like to pass over to Nina Skorupska, CBE.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you for the round of applause. Yes, it's a little exciting, but I must admit, coming to All Energy and having the pleasure and the privilege to chair this opening plenary session is just as exciting, I would argue. So we have a wonderful selection of speakers that will cover all the challenges facing renewable energy from both a local perspective and from Glasgow and Scotland, and we'll set the scene and the context for the rest of the 2 days. I'm sure you'll be able to take what our speakers have to say, build on those debates, and we're happy to hear some of that feedback at the end of the conference. Before we go into the panel session properly, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, which is Councillor Frank McAveety, the leader of the Glasgow City Council. He was born and raised in Glasgow and has served as the elected representative of the city since 1988 and first elected as member of the Glasgow District Council. He served as convener of the Arts and Culture Committee and led on to the development of the Gallery of Modern Art and initiated plans for large-scale development for the Kelvin Grove Gallery. So it's solidified its position as one of the top tourist attractions. He served as leader of Glasgow City Council from 1997 to 1999, establishing the first ever local authority standards committee and developing plans for the redevelopment and investment in Glasgow Secondary School estate. Elected to the Scottish Parliament for the Glasgow Shettleston constituency in 1999, he served in the Scottish Executive in a number of ministerial positions, including Deputy Minister for Local Government, Deputy Minister for Health and Community Care, Minister of Tourism, Culture and Sport, and during his tenure as minister, he established the National Theatre of Scotland and successfully campaigned to bring the headquarters of Sports Scotland to the East End of Glasgow. On his re-election in 2007, he was appointed convener of the Public Petitions Committee of the Parliament, and in 2012 elected to Glasgow City Council for the Shettleston ward, convening Sustainability and Environment Policy Committee and taking on this special responsibility for cycling. So he's been elected again as leader of Glasgow City Council in September 2015, and why not with all that experience? Please can I invite to the podium the leader of the City Council. Thank you.
I thought I was getting my life story there. Thanks, Nina. First of all, can I thank everyone for coming along this morning. I know that this event is a particularly impressive event in its scale and its intellectual capacity, and the fact that people are sharing lots of really interesting ideas that hopefully will shape our future world. So thank you for coming along. I hope that the hospitality that you receive in Glasgow, both from the organisers and the conference itself, but also in any other engagement you have, gives you a positive experience about the city of Glasgow. So welcome to Glasgow, Scotland's largest, friendliest and most stylish city. The powerhouse of the Scottish economy, the engineering, learning, smart, sporting, media, retail, cultural, bioscience, renewables, music and conference capital of Scotland. Typically Glaswegian, where we're trying to remind people of how impressive we think we sometimes can be. But I know that we're here today because we care passionately about what we want to do in terms of changing things for the future. And in terms of the neighbourhood that we're in, 20 years ago, the Finnieston area just nearby here would have been an area that would, in the textbooks or in the guidebooks, would have been seen as a challenging neighbourhood, would have been the phrase that would have been used. But as we look round about us in this part of Glasgow now, because of the regeneration on the Clyde, because of the commitment in terms of the music venues right alongside us here, there's been a real transformation and a continuing transformation of this part of Glasgow. And even looking across the river, we have obviously the media centre of Scotland. So we have a real capacity here, I think, which recognises that change can take place. And the business that each and every one of you are in is about change, and it's about recognising the contributions that you can make. I know that the organisers have had a very good relationship with Glasgow, and I hope that can continue in terms of the service that we can provide as a city, as a conference venue for the All Energy Conference. But I know that it's been mutually beneficial for both the city and the organisers, and I hope that can continue. And when we had the brief history of my biography there, it's interesting we look at the history of Glasgow. The history of Glasgow is one of the key cities in the Industrial Revolution within the United Kingdom. We stand as one of those cities that was essentially built on the industrial capacity of the country in the mid-19th century. Many of our academic institutions, including the University of Strathclyde, who are represented here today, were built on the very principles of the science and engineering principles that made Scotland one of the leaders in terms of the world, in terms of its past and hopefully for its future as well. Combined with the Enlightenment, combined with rational scientific analysis, I think Glasgow and Scotland has made a major contribution to all of that. And we have a recognition that we want to use the scientists and the thinkers and the creative people of the present to try and shape a better future itself. Because part of that industrial history, important as it has been, and I know that there were many people here that were involved in yesterday evening's meal in the city chambers, a grand municipal building built on much of that industrial wealth. But that kind of economy has shifted. There is still major industrial capacity in the city of Glasgow, and the University of Strathclyde and many others are leading on that. We want to ensure that we don't forget how brilliant our past has been, but how we learn from that to shape the present and the future itself. And sometimes the narrative is very often that cities don't have science or engineering capacity at their heart anymore. We still believe that Glasgow has that at its very, very core. But we recognise that our economy shifted, particularly in the last 50 years in Glasgow, like many in cities that have had to address the nature of the global economy. And we know that we recognise that we need to find different ways of doing things. And one of the big challenges is that we want to address the whole issue of carbon emission and the whole issue of what it is to be a sustainable city. I lead a council that has made very, very substantial commitments, both in our manifesto and in our operational activity, to address what we can do, not just as a council with what we own and what we deliver, but also what we can do in partnership with many other partners across the city. And that includes the private sector, businesses, individuals and communities, major providers of housing, the whole range of what it is to make a sustainable city. We want to work with those organisations and individuals. And we have a commitment to try and drive down the level of greenhouse emissions within the city and also the whole capacity of how to address the city's carbon challenge. So in terms of our commitment, we're already well on our way to meeting the 2020 commitment that we have, and we want to make sure that we want to work with those organisations to make a difference. But part of that is using the knowledge and the intelligence that's in this very room itself. If we don't share expertise, if we don't identify new ways of doing things, if we don't find ways in which we can actually put across the positive ways in which you can shift how big organisations do their business, we won't meet either the very impressive commitments that the Scottish Government have made with all party support in the Scottish Parliament in terms of our challenges for the future, but also how do we put pressure on decision makers, not just at Scottish level, but at British and European level. What we want to do is we want to put it in the context of what matters to people. One of the slogans that the city has is "People make Glasgow." The resonance of that in terms of our industrial history is important to me because Glasgow is a city where people made things that made a difference to their lives and the lives of everybody else in the world. But we want to make sure that with the people of Glasgow, we can make a real difference in working with them. So a lot of our sustainable initiatives are about working in communities. And by working in communities, we also need people like you to be able to give the advice, to identify in the businesses that you're in ways in which you can assist major developments. So as we transform the housing estate in Glasgow, which has been an ongoing process for the last 15 years, and there are major ambitions over the next 5 to 10 years, how do we work with you in terms of with those communities to find good solutions that are much more sustainable? We're investing heavily in our school estate, and that will again continue. We want to develop that as well. So we want to make sure we're making those changes. And one of the big changes that we've made in Glasgow is we had a very, very poor level of statistics in terms of what we did with our waste. So we've partnered up with Viridor, one of the major leaders in Europe in terms of handling waste, and we've now developed a major plant on the south side of Glasgow with a partnership that also involves the company through its apprenticeship programme and its employability programme, finding ways in which individuals can benefit and at the same time the wider community. And we're well on our way in terms of the development of the overall complex, which has emerged from the site on the south side of Glasgow to a very impressive level, and we hope by the summer that it's fully up and running and able to do the job that it's been tasked to do. So we're trying to develop these kind of new initiatives within the council and with our partners. We also want to work with our other city and council authorities round about us in the Clyde Valley. And again, we see that as a partnership to try and enhance the wider West of Scotland challenge in terms of being climate ready. So again, that's something that we are certainly wanting to work towards. We know that there's been an agreement in the Scottish Parliament for ambitious targets. What we now need to try and work on with the government is to deliver on those targets, but also to find resources to make sure we do deliver on those targets. So again, those are partnerships that we want to have with our partners across the Clyde Valley authorities and also right across the country. And I also chair the Sustainable Glasgow Committee, which is pulling together the private and public sector to demonstrate that we're absolutely committed as a city to making a real difference for the future, because economically and socially it is of benefit to Glasgow to be thinking ahead on this, because the amount of opportunities and employment that is emerging in the new economy, particularly in terms of the new economy relating to issues in terms of sustainability. It strikes me that if we are at the cutting edge of that, with a knowledge economy, with our academic institutions, and I've been involved in a number of meetings with the professor from the University of Strathclyde, looking at ways in which we can innovate through the companies that already exist in the city of Glasgow, and also the partnership that we can have with the private sector, because by combining everyone together, the world of academia, the world of business and commerce, and the world of public government and the representation of those issues, I think we can build a better solution for the future. So we're working with the Chamber of Commerce and many other organisations in the city to make a difference. And one of the first jobs I was asked to do when I was elected the leader of the City Council again, in fact, I'm probably a living example of how you can use recycling and sustainability in terms of politics, where I've managed to come back to be the leader of my home city, which is a fantastic privilege. And one of the key commitments that I want as a former teacher is how do we make sure that sustainability and the whole issue of science and the whole issue of encouraging intellectual exploration and development is embedded in our school curriculum. And in particular, along with a number of colleagues in the City Council, we are absolutely determined to improve the participation of women in terms of science and engineering, and the whole issue of what we can do to ensure that young women in particular can see that as an opportunity for a very full and fulsome career. So we're really committed to working towards that. And in the Science Centre just across the river there, we had 500 young people at a special conference fair looking at the ways in which young people could see jobs of the future based in the sector that we're speaking of. Because there's also an ethical dimension where that young citizen who cares about the global world also feels they want to be in a job that makes a difference. And again, in this sector that you'll be talking about over the next few days, there are incredible opportunities to get benefits from that and at the same time receive employment, that you're actually doing something that's making a difference for the world of the future. And for young people, that is a critically important issue. So I'm delighted to be here. I'll be spending time for the rest of the morning at the exhibition itself. I want to have a chance to hear the other speakers in this morning's session. But what I do want to say to the conference organisers, to everyone involved, I hope that it's been a very positive engagement with the City Council and the City of Glasgow. We believe that there's a mutually beneficial partnership that we have with each other. We want to recognise that what happens in the conference is something that can make a difference. And I know that in the previous events there's been fantastic opportunities that have been followed up beyond the conference, which is part of the reason why events like this take place. And I think that kind of synchronicity of what you provide and what we can hopefully help assist with can make a difference for the future. I want to finish and say that Glasgow's appellation in history is it's known as the Dear Green Place. But with your support, your intellectual capital, and with your commitment to the opportunities I think offered by the green economy, I'm confident we can make a greener and more sustainable Glasgow. And by working together, we can help not just Glasgow flourish, but ensure that the sector that you're in can flourish for the future, to make sure that you are at the cutting edge of the future developments. I think we can do that, and hopefully over the next few days, that shared discussion that you have can make a difference for you, your business, and the industry and sector that you care most passionately about. Thank you very much.
Now, I mentioned we've got a great panel, so let me just briefly introduce you to them so you know who those faces are behind there. After hearing me speak for about 10 minutes, I will be introducing Keith Anderson, the Chief Corporate Officer from ScottishPower and CEO of ScottishPower Renewables. We also have Julian Leslie from the Electricity Network as the Electricity Network Development Manager from National Grid. We have Jasper Rigter, the Associate Programme Officer for REmap 2030 from IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. And also we have Professor Sir Jim McDonald, Principal and Vice Chancellor at the University of Strathclyde. So you've got all of those wonderful speeches to hear from. But I'm here now to add about 10 minutes worth of provocative in giving you an overview of policies and politics that have influenced the renewable energy industry in 2015. My alternate title was Bonfire of the Policies for Clean Energy. So, I know many of you in this room will have lived through the second half of 2015, which was probably the most challenging time for the nascent renewable energy industry it has ever faced. For over a decade, we've seen growth in deployment, and we've seen explosion of solar appearing over 3 to 4 years. And at the REA, of which I'm the chief executive, we've grown also with that industry. We were set up in 2001, and with the evolution of this alternative energy into making it mainstream, it's part of our DNA. It really is. So from a cottage industry spoken about in fantastical times just 10 years ago, to standing on the precipice of delivering energy cheaper than fossil fuels, the economic direction is clear. 2015 saw a tipping point of renewables attracting more investment than traditional fuels worldwide. And I think we'll hear that a little bit later from our other speakers. The renewable industry should be a point of national pride, an area of real success showcasing British ingenuity and innovation. We made groundbreaking strides forward in wind turbine during the 80s. We've had the intellectual jump on the rest of the world in terms of marine energy. The cost reduction seen in solar, and not just to cheaper panels, but also the fact that the British solar industry has driven down the costs in the same way maybe as the British cycling team has revolutionised their sport through the aggregation of marginal gains and getting those improvements which are making the solar industry championing and maybe looking to have no supports in the future. And this is at a time when nuclear is going up in cost, coupled with the doubts over its deliverability. Costs for some of the renewable energy technologies are still going down and can be deployed quickly, cleanly and sustainably. The cost of certain new renewables now may in fact be cheaper than most new fossil fuel generation. I say in fact because there is no way of knowing. No new gas station has been commissioned in the last 4 years, and the last plant to open is 2012, started construction in 2008. The nearest viable one is in Trafford, and they quote that they need £72 per megawatt hour as the equivalent of a CFD to complete. Now, the current wholesale price is around £40 a megawatt hour, leaving a gap of £32. That needs to be plugged if the UK is going to have our new capacity from fossil generation. For reference, in the last round of the renewable contracts under the new Contract for Difference scheme, solar and wind both came in around about £79. However, that was back in February 2015, and the cost will have certainly have gone down even further. But in a twist of events, it looks as though through 2016, we will see new gas subsidised. The nuclear deal still supported by energy consumers at £92.50 a megawatt hour. And even more bizarrely, and this is what hurts the most, we're subsidising diesel via the capacity market. Yet arguably the cheapest of all new generation options, wind and solar, will be blocked from having access to any market. So to summarise, the government policy now subsidises diesel but blocks the cleaner, most cost-effective choices. How did we get here? It's undoubtedly exacerbated by the low gas prices, making new capacity unattractive for energy companies, in addition to subsidies costing more due to the drop in wholesale price. Yet whilst the wholesale price is out of the government's hand, the assault on renewables is not. In fact, the blame is pointed squarely at the government, unshackled from coalition. Many trade bodies and green groups condemned the Conservative manifesto before the election. The REA alone, we thought, okay, we can work with whichever government comes in place, and we can hear the voice saying cost effectiveness, coupled with a really good record of delivery from Conservative ministers like Lord Barker. In any case, we'd assumed, along with many others, that a Conservative manifesto would be tempered by a further coalition. Maybe the Lib Dems again. And with that commitment in that manifesto for scrapping onshore wind, that could have been traded away as part of the coalition deal. Well, we got a few things wrong, didn't we? And also, if you fast forward to the day before Parliament rose for Christmas break, the solar, anaerobic digestion, hydro and wind sectors were waiting for the inevitable mass dumping of government news, which would contain other final levels of subsidy following the initial consultations, slashing the feed-in tariff by, close to 90%. In the end, it was only 60. So we should be grateful for that. And it was capped by 100 million for the entire microgeneration and domestic sector. And with that particular action, that was the 13th negative impact in terms of policies that we'd received in 6 months before. Unlucky for us. Part of the shock, really, I think, to the industry and maybe to some of you was the optimism that back in 2015, when we were reporting as the REA, record-breaking year in investment, 115,000 people working in the industry, all working in renewables. Let's remember that, 115,000 jobs in the renewable industry. The statistics, which we'll be revealing next week, shows that it's grown to 117, not as fast a growth as we were hoping for. It was all about the fact that the facts coupled with the knowledge that we're so close for some of the technologies to what's known as cost parity with fossil generation, and the glide path to grid parity was clear. And the main industry ask was policy certainty from government. Policy certainty that would ensure that the finance industry confidence would remain robust and would support the business models needed to base a sustainable industry free of subsidy in the future and further government, as some of my members would say, interference by the next decade. If that was our hope this time last year, where do we go from here? Firstly, the industry has to move on from the last year and to come to terms with the new government agenda. This may be painful for some of you to do, and many well-run, credible companies have departed the scene. But the overall direction of renewables is clear. It is an unstoppable global movement now. Whilst we may have to spend a couple of envious years looking over our shoulders to our partners in other countries who've got more clearer support and looking at the ease with which that they can deploy their technologies, we need to get back to doing what we have already shown we're capable of, innovation and finding UK solutions for the issues that we've got here in the UK. And maybe whilst the era of subsidies is coming to a premature and abrupt end, renewables and new technologies coupled together can provide an answer to some of the most important and strategic policy problems we face in one of the oldest and most complex energy markets in the world. Some of these problems are merely of an aging infrastructure. Last September, the then Chief Executive of the National Grid, Steve Holliday, came out with a wonderful statement that we need to shift our thinking. And I quote, "The idea of baseload power is already outdated. I think you should look at this the other way around, from a consumer's point of view. Baseload is what, as a consumer, I'm producing myself. The solar on my rooftop, my heat pump, that's the base load. Those are the electrons that are free at the margin. The point is, this is an industry that was based on meeting demand. An extraordinary amount of capital was tied up for an unusual set of circumstances to ensure supply at any time, because no government wants the lights to go out. This is now turned on its head. The future will be much more driven by availability by supply, by demand-side response and management, which will enable the market to balance price of supply and demand. It's how we balance these things that will determine the future shape of our business. I think I stood up and applauded at that point in my office when I read that. There is a new way of thinking of how to do it. This is the business case for renewables that doesn't rely on targets, our 2020 ones, or subsidies, but of economic and consumer terms. There is a very real problem with the old way of thinking that is no longer suited to modern realities, and renewables offer part of that practical solution in a more decentralised grid. The second is the financial environment we inherit. The old model, based on big pieces of kit only, is increasing unrealistic. In a nationalised system, maybe, like France, it would still perhaps be practical to fund power generation in the billions for a single project. But we've seen the problems with Hinkley Point C, and it's proving near impossible to raise capital and to underwrite that risk. My old company, the RWE Group, are struggling to understand how to fund large assets in the future. Smaller gas plant is also proving difficult, with policy uncertainty playing its part, and the low wholesale price too. But large energy companies, and we'll hear, I hope, from somebody on the panel, will be able to say that, they've got reduced reserves. The ambitions are high, but the ability of capital to fund all of those without certainty is very, very difficult. Smaller, easy-to-fund projects are looking much more attractive and can have much lower financing costs if we can get the finance community to understand the risk linked with the technologies. Thirdly, my last point, the inherent problem of certain renewables technologies' variability is soon to be turned into a positive when coupled with energy storage. It's no surprise here at All Energy that we now have an energy storage section and the electric vehicles, because with energy storage, the instant dispatchability is a stark contrast to the unresponsive and inflexible nature of baseload generation. For many, energy storage is still viewed as a green pipe dream, still decades away. This is now demonstrably wrong, with companies around the world already operating energy storage plants. Even better, they're operating energy storage projects without subsidy. California is undoubtedly leading the way, but the UK is looking to catch up quickly. There's many demonstration projects set up. Two is the Leighton Buzzard one that many of you will have heard, but also more recently AES's Cllr in Northern Ireland is a 10 megawatt plant recently opened with plans to extend to 100. And the National Grid announced a tender for 200 megawatts of enhanced frequency response capacity, which resulted in 68 project submissions, totaling 1.3 gigawatts. So that's why the REA is looking at what is the societal driver to enable renewable energy to be successful, to be a sustained industry, and why we're very interested in the Decentralised Energy Forum, which we've created. We published a recent KPMG report on decentralised energy, particularly looking at what energy storage could do. Is it ready to go for grid? Yes. For domestic? Maybe not. What are those cost-benefit analyses? Still have to be done. But it showed that cost reductions for energy storage are happening now. And if it follows the same trajectory as solar, as some people would say, with mass building of various facilities to build the systems, then we would see the grid benefits of a less centralised system and move to systems actively rewarding demand-side management and balancing. It's not just me who said that. I think many of you will have picked up the report in March, which was from the National Infrastructure Commission, which said, by looking at smart energy systems incorporating renewables, storage, demand-side management, interconnectors, smart meters, the whole smarty stuff, we could save $9 billion per year up to 2030 in delivering a secure low-carbon energy future. At the REA, we want to ensure that renewable energy plays its part into this new energy future. I hope you'll work with us to deliver it. Thank you. So, after hearing a trade association, I'd love to invite our next speaker, which is Keith Anderson, the Chief Corporate Officer from ScottishPower and the Chief Executive Officer from ScottishPower Renewables. Keith is the Chief in this position for Iberdrola's group activities with ScottishPower in the UK, and in particular leading the group's 15 billion investment plan. Maybe they do have some money left. And Keith was appointed to the board in February 2012. Keith also retains his role as the Chief Executive Officer of ScottishPower Renewables, which is the UK arm of Iberdrola's Renewables division. His responsibilities encompasses all of the group's renewables activity in the UK and Iberdrola's global offshore business. Prior to joining ScottishPower, Keith has worked with some major financial institutions, including the Royal Bank of Scotland, Standard Life, as well as working at the management consultant with Ernst & Young. And we look forward to hearing his presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I got up far too early. I didn't think there was that much to say about me or my past, but thank you for that kind introduction. Nina also kind of half answered the first question I was going to ask, which is, as I wonder about this industry and around conferences, I keep coming to the question, why is it everybody looks so bloody miserable? Because as an industry, we do. You go around conferences, you go to meetings, events like this, and as an industry, we look like somebody's taken our toys away, and we look very unhappy the whole time. So I thought maybe it's worthwhile just having a wee think about where we are and where we should go. We've had the COP21 agreement signed in Paris. It's 170 countries across the world who've signed the first ever universal, legally binding climate deal. So that has to be a good step forward. To meet the goals in that agreement, we as a sector need to spend and invest more than we've ever spent and invested before, which has to be good news. Transport and heat need to start contributing more, and the way they'll do that is through electric vehicles, electric heating, storage, relying on renewable energy, which has to be good news as well. The International Energy Agency estimated that to achieve the targets in COP21, across the world, we need to double renewable energy capacity. That must be good news as well. So why in God's name are we feeling so sorry for ourselves? All of that says our industry has a fantastic future. Right now, today, my company, we're building 8 onshore wind farms and 2 offshore projects from our UK business. We're investing today £4 billion in renewable energy. Yet you wander around and people would make you believe our industry is coming to an end. It has no future. In the UK, we're leading the world in the development of offshore wind. We're growing a supply chain, we're creating jobs, inward investment, manufacturing. Onshore wind is the cheapest renewable technology being deployed and maintained, and it's critical to the future of meeting any renewable targets. Onshore wind costs have come down to such an extent that they are now at or about parity in terms of new forms of investment generation in the United Kingdom. Now, I don't think I live in some deluded dream world. I know there are issues, I know there are challenges, but I think as an industry we need to focus a bit more on the context of where we are, what we've achieved, and on the opportunities that face us, and make sure that we take those opportunities and we carry on being a huge success, because our industry has been a huge success to date. So, 3 things I think we need to think about. Number 1, onshore wind. Yes, we do need to see a little bit more flexibility from the government on the future of onshore wind through Westminster. But that can't mean behaving like a bunch of salivating subsidy junkies, banging down their front door, asking them and trying to embarrass them into reversing public policy statements that they've made. We need to sit down sensibly and calmly with the government and find a good, clear way where we can create a framework that carries on allowing us to invest both onshore and offshore in the United Kingdom. And a framework that benefits us, it benefits them as a government to meet their targets, and it benefits consumers who end up paying for what we do. And as well as looking at new projects, we need to very rapidly get people focused on life extension. We've been running and building projects in our business since the early 1990s. And very shortly, we're coming to a time where, in theory, those projects come to an end. They come to the end of the 25 years planned life. And we're living in a country and working in a country where we fought very hard to get 8.5 gigawatts of renewable energy built and developed and connected to the system. We're in a country where capacity margins are getting tighter, in a country where renewables targets continue to grow. So none of us can sit and afford to look at a world where by 2020 we're switching off renewable energy. But that's what's going to happen unless we, as an industry, take that forward, sit down with the government and plan a policy framework at Westminster and at Holyrood that allows life extension, sensible life extension of existing renewable energy projects. Second point, storage. And I know Nina talked briefly about storage as well. We need to make the most of the megawatts we generate, so we need to get smarter at integrating and using renewable energy on our grid system. I think probably storage is one of the most pressing issues our industry faces across the whole of the world. Right now, we produce about 23 million gigawatts of electricity a year over the world, and we have about 500 gigawatt hours of storage. It's nowhere near enough to run an energy system, and particularly not an energy system where we're growing renewables and making renewables a bigger part of that system. Now, in our industry in the UK, you very rarely hear anyone in the renewable sector talk about curtailments. We're embarrassed to talk about curtailments. We're frightened that someone in the media will use curtailments as a way of hurting our industry or saying our industry gets subsidised and it doesn't even produce energy. But curtailments are a fact of life for us. They're a fact of life for the UK energy system. And I'll give you an example. Over the Easter holiday weekend in the United Kingdom, we switched off 50,000 gigawatt hours of renewable energy. That's enough renewable energy to power 12,500 houses for the entire year, and we switched it off because we couldn't store it. And if you take that one weekend and multiply that out across the whole of the world, or the rest of the year in the UK, it shows you the size of challenge. We are throwing renewable energy away. We're wasting it. That's why I think the industry, us as an industry, we need to come forward with more innovation and more development and better ideas on how to run storage on our system. Storage at a large scale, storage at a grid level, storage at a domestic level, and look at how we better run and use the energy we produce and maximise what we do with renewable power. We've worked as a company looking at expanding pump storage stations in Scotland. I know our colleagues at SSE are doing the same thing. But right now, in the UK, there is no clarity about the future of storage. There's no framework, there's no policy that encourages investment in storage. And that's something I think we as an industry, again, need to sit down with Westminster, with Holyrood, and look at a policy framework that benefits everyone. Benefits them as a government, us as an industry, and consumers. Third thing, leadership. We need to keep showing some leadership. We know we need to start shutting down the highest carbon emitting forms of generation. For over 100 years, we've been using coal, and coal has dominated electricity production, and it's helped build industries and economies. At ScottishPower, we operated the second largest coal plant in the UK, the third largest coal plant in Europe. And we were quite sad to shut it down earlier this year. Sad to shut it down because it's been a huge part of our history. We're a huge workforce, dedicated, skilled workforce, committed to energy production at that plant. But ultimately, we knew there wasn't a long-term future for coal. And we know there's not a long-term future for coal in terms of emitting that amount of carbon into the atmosphere. And the emissions are too high, and the technology to reduce those emissions is too expensive, far too expensive. And again, we've got good experience and knowledge of that. We ran a pilot project to look at stripping out carbon emissions from coal generation at Longannet. And technically you can do it, but the cost of it is horrific. Particularly when you put it in context of other forms of effective, efficient, deployable renewable technology that we have ready and available now, onshore wind and offshore wind. So we need to keep pushing and challenging and driving those technologies forward. The government's shown leadership and it's created challenges. It's signed the COP21 agreement. We've put the targets in place, but the real leadership and the real challenge starts now. It starts with actually trying to deliver and meet those targets. And that's what the people in this room and the people in our industry need to focus on. We're the ones with the skills, the knowledge, and the expertise to make it happen and to make it work. We're the ones who need to sit down and work with the government and help them achieve their targets and deliver what we want and what we need. We're the ones that need to deliver the innovation to drive down the cost of renewable energy. We're the ones who need to deliver the innovation to create our industry's future. It's our industry. We need to innovate it and deliver its future. We're the ones that need to show leadership as companies and as individuals to bring in and inspire the next generation of people. Because we need youngsters coming in to our industry. We need to inspire school children, primary school, secondary school, apprentices, graduates, and bring them into this industry because they are the ones that will innovate and deliver our future. And the only way we'll do that is by being positive. That gets me back to the point I made at the start. If we're not positive and we don't believe in the future of our industry, why in God's name is anyone else going to believe us? Thank you.
My job now is only to jump up here and introduce our next speaker, which is Julian Leslie from the National Grid, and to go through his biography a little bit and embarrass him too. He's worked for the National Grid for the past 24 years, and he's performed many roles within the National Grid, so he knows it inside out. System operator in GB and National Grid even in the US. These roles and experiences have led to this deep understanding of transmission grid system operation and the challenges put forward. So he's now responsible for Great Britain's future system capability needs and planning the year ahead and beyond system access requirements. So looking at the economics, timely investments and network design to making sure it's secure and operable. But most recently, prior to this role, Julian was responsible for managing the current and future transmission connections to the GB transmission network, and hence appreciates the challenges and risks that developers are taking in developing new generation projects. So I think we've got a very good speaker here to understand what renewable energy needs and the system. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here back in Glasgow. It's also great to see you going to the Science Centre this evening to see the Powering Our Future exhibition, which National Grid, along with many other major partners, played a role in pulling that together. And it brings all the issues we're going to talk about today and you're going to hear over the next 2 days. That exhibition brings all those together in a very interactive and fun way. So if you didn't plan on going this evening, it's very worthwhile. So why am I here? Nina's given me a great introduction, so thank you. National Grid, we're experts in networks. We do gas and electricity networks, both here in the GB and in the US. We're the second largest utility in the United States. And we operate and own the gas transmission network across GB, the electricity network in England and Wales. But I'm here today to talk to you in the capacity of the Great Britain system operator, managing the energy market and managing the national electricity transmission network. So the issues that have been spoken about already this morning are very close to my heart. We're dealing with those issues all of the time. We're trying to deliver solutions into our control room that make sure that the lights stay on 24/7, 365. So I'm really going to talk about some facts and figures and say what it is like from a GB system operator. What are we seeing out there? What are the impacts of the renewable policies we've had over the last few years? What are the impacts we're seeing now that the policy arena is changing? And really have a look at what some of the issues that that's creating on the transmission network, and then finally lead into what are some of those solutions, and to echo previous comments around storage and the framework and regulatory understanding as to how that's going to work. So move to distributed generation. I joined National Grid 24, 25 years ago, and I thought I'm going to be dealing with big gigawatt plus power stations, talk about bulk transfer of power, which has been true for the first 20 years, but for the last 4 years, I now talk about 500 kilowatt connections. I talk about megawatt connections. And really is a demonstration as to how this industry has changed very rapidly over these last 4 or 5 years to move away from large, centrally dispatched, centrally connected to transmission network generation. It started here in Scotland with a lot of small wind farms, 1 or 2, 3 turbine wind farms, creating and wanting to connect to the distribution networks here in Scotland, which then cumulatively creates an issue on the transmission network. So we saw it here first. We've been working both with SHE Transmission and SP Transmission and the distribution network operators here in Scotland to find manageable solutions so we can facilitate the connection of the renewable wind and make sure that we still have a network that's operable. Since then, certainly in the last 12 months, that phenomenon has moved south. And along the southeast coast, with a move to solar generation, in the last 12 months, we've connected to the distribution network networks over 7 gigawatts of solar generation. 7 gigawatts in 12 months. To put that in perspective, Hinkley C, it's been in the planning for years, it's still a long way to go. That's 3.8 gigawatts. So we've connected twice the capacity of Hinkley C within 12 months, and that's all coming from solar. Now, do we expect to be a slowdown during this year? Now the subsidy arrangements have changed, absolutely. Are we still seeing a huge pressure from the distribution network operators to connect more and more renewable generation onto their networks? Yes, we are. It's not quite at the pace that we've seen, but it's certainly still coming forward very much so. We're also seeing, if you're an avid watcher of the capacity mechanism auctions, and as we mentioned already this morning, that even to maintain our security supply through the capacity mechanism, we're moving away from the large centrally dispatched generation and moving to small open cycle gas turbines, diesel generators, many, many hundreds of these small generators that cumulatively add up to a significant number of gigawatts. We think nearly 4 gigawatts of diesel generation and open cycle gas turbine is now planning to and will be on the network by 2018 to meet our capacity requirements. But who would have thought that a 2 megawatt diesel generator in 2016 would be something that's worth investing in to participate in securing the GB sort of national demand? That's where we are. It's costing us £1 billion a year to create that subsidy and to fund that subsidy. So this is causing problems on the network. As network companies, on the transmission network alone, we're investing just under £2 billion a year to replace, to renew, but also to invest in new elements to our networks. That's £2 billion just in the transmission network, let alone what the distribution networks are having to invest on their business. So there's lots of investment on a networks perspective, but some of our networks are becoming full. And they're becoming full in different regions for different reasons. So in the southeast, renewable generation with solar and wind, and the southwest, very southwest, is creating issues on both the transmission network and the distribution network. So we need to find more innovative solutions that create capacity, hence storage is part of that. If you look to South Wales, a different issue there, this is now a thermal issue. Because of the industrial nature of demand in South Wales, they're the places where these open cycle gas turbines and diesel generators are wishing to connect. But we're not seeing the closure of the transmission connected generation in South Wales. So it's becoming an issue in exporting, just at the time we need that energy to meet the nation's demand. There's an issue about exporting that energy from South Wales. So the future is here now. This move to distributed generation is not something that could happen. It's not something that might happen. It's something that is here today, and we're having to manage it on a day-by-day basis. Part of the issues, as we mentioned earlier, around the Easter weekend, is the fact that all this distributed generation is displacing transmission generation. It's creating constraints on our network that we need to manage. The other issues that this creates is that system inertia is a problem. We have an AC system in GB. It's operating around 50 hertz. We need spinning machines to maintain that frequency if we lose a big chunk of generation. That is being diminished, so we need to find other sources of energy. So as also been mentioned, our contract expressions for interest around 200 megawatts of extremely fast reserve from storage facilities, 1.3 gigawatts of interest, which is fantastic. So we're starting small, we're building up this innovative way of managing the network. We're also, for this summer, having a demand turn-up service as well, so talking about controlling demand much more, and as Steve Holliday said, the base load and then tweaking generation to meet demand, those days need to evolve and change. We need to be much more about changing our demand to meet the generation. So for this summer, for the first time ever, we've got a demand turn-up service. So if you're running an industry that's heavy on consumption and you can control the timing of that consumption, then again, there's an additional revenue stream for us. So speaking about revenue, today the balancing service pot of money is around £900 million. That's only going to increase going forward. So if you've got flexibility, flexible demand, flexible generation, flexible storage, there is already a £1 billion market available for you to participate in, and that's only going to increase. So again, it's about grasping the opportunity, it's about thinking innovatively, understanding the issues that grid faces, working with us to create products and services and being part of that £1 billion market. There's also the role of the distribution network operators in this. Are they a fit and forget? Do they become dynamic system operators as we are on a transmission network? Can the distribution system operators have the services and the tools and the mechanisms that we have on the transmission network, but manage that on a much more local basis? All of these things need to come into the mix. The whole system planning, looking at all of this system as it all comes together, not distribution and transmission isolation anymore, bringing those two things together is absolutely the way we need to go. And we're working with DEC and Ofgem and our DNO partners to understand how that might work going forward. So what are some of the solutions to all of this? Interconnection with our close neighbours and our faraway neighbours, maybe in Iceland, is absolutely part of the solution. The National Infrastructure Commission put out a note to say that 9 gigawatts seems in their mind to be a no regrets level of further interconnection to GB. National Grid ourselves, our business development, created a report about a year ago that said there's £1 billion of benefit to the GB consumer by greater interconnection. One of my roles under Enhanced System Operator is that in January 17, I need to publish a report which talks about the benefits of interconnection to the GB consumer. What is the right amount of capacity for that interconnection, and which two markets should it couple together? And then supporting the Ofgem in their cap and floor regime. Obviously, as we get more interconnection, the market arbitrage becomes less, but we still need people to invest in these interconnection projects. Interconnectors are great because of the technology. They provide a lot of services to grid. They're very fast. They provide dynamic response, but also, to the point mentioned also earlier, if we have an excess of renewables in GB, which sometimes we do, we've got access to other markets. And when it's not windy or sunny in GB, we have access to other markets to import power also. So again, as an EU-based market, then interconnection is the way forward to share those resources and to get the best out of all of our networks. And then storage. People think storage is a nascent technology. It isn't. We've got 9 gigawatts of potential connections now in the distribution network, all with contracts ready to connect, all with grid access capability. 9 gigawatts. That's all come on within a year. Now, not all of those projects will come forward, obviously, but there's an industry and a capacity out there that is exploring all of this technology, the finding sites, finding locations, doing that initial investment to be sure that as and when a regulatory and commercial framework comes forward and we have the certainty as to how storage will be treated, then they're good to go and they're ready and they can deploy very quickly. Now, we need storage. It provides, we believe it can provide sort of anywhere up to 13 grid services. We need to change our contract structure so you can layer those services as well, so you can have one device that is doing a bit of constraint management, it's doing about network investment avoidance, it's doing a bit of frequency response, voltage control, and you name it. We believe that these storage devices, if located in the right place with the right commercial frameworks around, you can get many, many revenue streams for a single device, which then makes it from being unaffordable to very, very affordable. So not only do we have the 9 gigawatts of connections applying to the distribution networks, we've also got 250 megawatt plus size storage devices which wish to connect to the transmission network. So storage is here. There's an industry out there that's trying to corner itself and get a place in the market with grid access. So as I say, as the regulatory and commercial frameworks come forward, then they're going to be ready to go. So I think, in summary, I think there's 3 major areas. We are moving to a distributed world away from central dispatch generation. That's here, it's now. The challenges for operability that creates does mean in the short term that there will be additional curtailment and constraints on some of these renewables and storage facilities, but we'll work together with the industry to try and create additional capacity in an innovative way. And finally, there is a huge opportunity out there. There's a huge market. As I said already, it's £1 billion today. That's only going to increase going forward. We need more services on the networks, and the more flexible you can be, the more advanced your technology can be, and your inverters and everything else as you connect to our network. Think about how you can provide frequency services, voltage services, and dynamic response services, and there's a great market for you all to be involved in. Thank you for listening. Thank you very much.
Moving right on, I'd like to introduce Jasper Rigter. I hope I have pronounced that correctly. He works for the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, on its Renewable Energy Map program. He was one of the authors of the 2016 edition of the Renewable Energy Map Global Roadmap, IRENA's roadmap for renewable energy future, and organizes the program's engagement with the private sector. And prior to joining IRENA, he worked with the National Oil and Gas Company of Saudi Arabia on assessing the potential of renewables in the country. Jasper holds an MPhil in economics from the University of Cambridge and MSc in engineering systems management from the Mazda Institute of Abu Dhabi. So I'm looking forward to hearing this presentation of how renewables is going on around the world. Thank you. Welcome, Jasper.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I actually prepared some slides, so just making sure that actually works. For those of you who don't know IRENA, we're the International Renewable Energy Agency. We seek to advance the deployment of renewable energy around the globe. We currently have 176 countries, either as member or in the process of becoming a member, and we're celebrating our 5th anniversary this year. When we were founded 5 years ago, we only had 75 countries as members. So this, in our view, shows also the growing global interest in renewable energy. Looking back at 2015, we can conclude it was a very good year for renewable energy around the world. New records were set for both solar PV and wind power installations. 47 gigawatt of solar PV, 63 gigawatt of wind power. And all of this despite an environment where fossil fuel prices continue to decline. At the same time, we saw new records for generation costs. Solar PV tenders in Peru led to about $4.8 a kilowatt hour. And for wind, we saw a record closer to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. So in general, we conclude that the global energy transition is indeed ongoing. And we now count 164 countries that actively stimulate renewable energy deployment through their policies. Looking at the UK, of course, already a lot has been said. As the only foreigner on the stage, I won't talk about it too much, but just kind of looking back, we can indeed see significant increase in renewable power. According to our estimates, about 7 gigawatt also of solar PV installed, but I think the numbers might actually be much higher if you count all the distributed PV. Of course, this year it looks to be a bit lower with all the feed-in tariff cuts, but we do think the long-term outlook remains positive. And the main reason for that is simply cost reductions for renewable power generation. And of course, mainly this is the case for solar PV. This graph shows you the trend between 2010 and 2014. The low end of the range is about $6 per kilowatt hour, which at the time was set in Dubai. As I just mentioned, last year in Peru, we saw 4.7 cents a kilowatt hour. And earlier this week, a tender in Dubai, project bids came in at about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, of course, the sun doesn't, nearly shine as much in Glasgow or in the UK, for that matter, compared to Dubai. But we can undeniably say that the trend is clear. Costs will continue to go down, and this will further accelerate deployment all over the world. Now, looking a bit further into the future, I would like to talk about our REmap program. So REmap is IRENA's roadmap for a renewable energy future. It was actually the outcome of the United Nations Sustainable Energy for All initiative in 2010, which set as one of its objectives to double the share of renewable energy by 2030 in the global energy mix. It's important to note that we don't only look at the power sector, but we also look at the end-use sector, so transportation, industry, buildings, as well as district heat generation. And the way we do this, or compile this roadmap, is that we work together with 40 countries, representing about 80% of global energy use. And together with them, we look at what their national energy plans say, what the conclusions are for renewable energy deployment in such a business-as-usual scenario, and what extra could be done to indeed reach a doubling of the renewable energy share. And I will talk in a little bit why we think such a doubling is an important objective. So doubling the share of renewable energy by 2030, as I mentioned, definitely not an easy objective. Right now, we're at about 18% of renewable energy as a share of total final energy consumption, so across all sectors and all uses. In a business-as-usual outlook, based on our numbers, the world will get to about 21% in 2030. So an increase, but not what is needed. Next, we identify together with these countries what extra could be done based on current technologies and based on the identified potential on a country level. And this is what we call the REmap options, and this takes us to about a 25% share. Next, we think what's important is more electricity access based on renewable energy. Of course, the developing world, this is an issue, as well as improving energy efficiency. This could take the world to about 30%. Still, 6 percentage points away from actually doubling the share of renewables. And the last 6% we say could be done, but you need more breakthrough technologies, you need structural changes in policy, and you also might want to think more outside of the box in terms of industry relocation and so on. It's not an easy target to get to, but it's important to keep in mind why we should set these ambitious targets, and I will get to that just in a minute. Looking a little bit deeper into the results and looking at the different sectors, we see today power accounts for about 20% of all renewables globally. In 2030, this would increase to almost half, or 44%. So, as we already saw today, the only discussion we've had has been on the power sector. But we do think it's also very important to keep in mind that the end-use sector, so heating, cooling, transportation, more needs to be done there to facilitate more renewable energy uptake. This could either be done, of course, through electrification or by stimulating direct use of renewable energy, biofuels, solar thermal collectors, and so on. And we feel especially those sectors have been overlooked in recent years. Now, coming back to the objective of doubling, one of the key reasons is that if we double by 2030, we might indeed get to a world that is supplied by a majority of renewable energy in its energy use, roughly around mid-decade. And this is important because this is actually what is necessary to be on this 1.5 to 2 degree limit for global warming that everyone talks about. So if we want to reach the target set in Paris last year, according to our calculations, much more needs to be done than what is being done right now. Looking a bit more at the carbon emission side, when you look at what the countries actually submitted for their nationally determined contributions, leading up to the Paris Agreement, we saw much more of a focus on energy efficiency, and the potential for renewable energy remained largely overlooked. According to our calculations, however, the potential for renewables is about on par with energy efficiency in achieving the 1.5 to 2 degree roadmap. So we urge policymakers around the world to accurately reflect these potentials in their energy planning. Now, at the same time, if we would actually take this more ambitious path for renewable energy deployment, we see savings greatly exceeding cost. Of course, a lot of this has to do with externalities, air pollution especially. We see that the savings from outdoor, indoor air pollution as well as CO2 emissions would exceed the additional cost to the energy system by about 4 to 15 times in our advanced roadmap. However, this of course requires that some of these externalities will be internalized. About 40% of the potential across a range of different technologies we already see being cost competitive by 2030, especially of course in the power sector. But for others, some accurate reflection of the externalities associated with fossil fuels is still an important topic in our view. Looking at the kind of geographical split, we do see there's a role for all countries to play, but of course a couple of regions stand out in terms of renewable energy potential. We think the US, China, and the EU combined account for about half of all this renewable energy potential, and these countries should really kind of take their responsibility as well. As I mentioned, we do the analysis on a country level. So these are all the 40 countries we looked at. I know it's probably very difficult to read, so I won't go into too much detail, but I think the key message here is that the potential for renewable is really a case-by-case story. I mean, the case of the UK is very different than the case of Indonesia, for example, or the case of Brazil. Different technologies, different starting points, different resources, different technology preferences, and so on. So it's very difficult to kind of come up with one sort of global solution. And we see also a wide range of what then the realistic deployment potential is for different countries, ranging from as low as 10% to as high as 90% in certain countries. Looking at the UK, in 2010, according to our methodology, renewable energy accounted for only 4% of total final energy consumption. In the reference case, which is based on the DEC energy projections, the UK would reach about 17%. And as I showed earlier, of course, it's already doing a lot, especially in power generation. But we think much more potential exists to actually achieve about a third of total final energy consumptions served by renewable energy in 2030. And for the UK especially, increased electrification we think is very important, electric vehicles, as well as heat pumps in industry, also in residential and commercial buildings. Of course, coupled with more solar PV and wind. What's interesting, if you look at the cost benefits of following this path, we strongly see that the system cost would actually be reduced. Of course, a very hot topic these days, the cost of PV and wind versus nuclear, for example. But in our view, especially in this longer term time frame, it's a no-brainer that the renewable energies will be cost competitive, even if you account for additional investments needed into the network to accommodate this variable renewable energy. So looking at the global picture, we have kind of 5 sort of high-level key action areas that we think are important to address. First, correcting for market distortions. Last year alone, globally, about 500 billion was spent in fossil fuel subsidies still. And of course, this would be gradually removed over time. This would mean renewables would actually do much better because of the level playing field that will be created. We do see some positive trends there, by the way. I mean, countries like Indonesia, for example, have really lowered some of its subsidies on gasoline and diesel in recent years, and there is numerous other examples that I could mention. The second one, introducing greater flexibility into energy systems. I think here in the UK, of course, it's already a discussion that's well underway, but it's also a message we bring to developing countries that have just started to really integrate some forms of renewables into their power systems, and they are not yet thinking ahead of, okay, what might happen if you reach like a much more significant level of solar PV on our grid, for example. So we also help them start thinking about that. As I mentioned before, what we call end-use sectors, so transport, building, industry, remain largely overlooked these days. We think policymakers should spend much more focus there. And another area is bioenergy, all the way on the right. In our calculations, bioenergy would still account for nearly half of all renewable energy use in 2030. It's a topic that a lot of people don't like to talk about. It comes with a lot of specific issues, but we think ensuring a sustainable supply of bioenergy feedstock is crucial, and more attention needs to go there at a global level. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation, and thank you for your attention.
Okay, I think that was fascinating to understand how things are developing around the world, and I do agree with Jasper. We have talked mainly about electricity so far this morning, but I know the rest of the 2 days in All Energy will be tackling heat and transport across a whole number of fronts, and those are areas that are very particular and passionate for the REA as well, for many of our members working in that area. And last but not least, in this panel today, we've got Professor Sir Jim McDonald, who's the Principal and Vice-Chancellor of the University of Strathclyde. He co-chairs with the First Minister the Scottish Government's Energy Advisory Board. He is Chairman of the Independent Glasgow Economic Leadership Board and the Board of the Glasgow Science Centre. He currently holds several senior non-executive business appointments in ScottishPower, Weir Group, UK Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult Board, and the UK National Physical Economy Laboratory. In 2012, he was awarded a knighthood for services to education, energy and economy. He is a Fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, Royal Society of Edinburgh, Institution of Engineering and Technology, Institute of Physics, and I'm looking forward to hearing his presentation this morning. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you very much, Nina. It just struck me from one of the earlier presentations. If it takes an accountant to try and cheer us up from the depths of depression, we must be in a real state, Keith. But you did a manful job, and thank you very much for that. You heard Nina making mention of the Energy Advisory Board that I'm involved in since its inception, something I'm proud of, something that I take very seriously. And I want to reflect and give you a preview of the direction of travel of the work of the Energy Advisory Board, which I suspect will pick up momentum sometime through Friday after the Scottish people have spoken tomorrow. The Energy Advisory Board met most recently in March when Nicola Sturgeon joined myself, Keith, Alistair Phillips-Davies and others from the industry, including National Grid and EDF as it happens, to talk about refocusing of the Scottish energy strategy. And I want to share some of the headlines of that with you. It's an important resetting. I think it reaffirms Scotland's commitment to low-carbon energy, of course, renewables. But in the context of some of the things that Nina shared with us, it's important that Scotland moves itself into a more assertive, proactive position. The Energy Advisory Board has involved with it about 100 senior industrial people, such as Keith, such as others from the utilities. We have oil and gas in there, the consumer groups, and senior representatives of academia, with subgroups involved in grid, renewables, carbon capture and storage, and thermal generation, and of course skills. Very important, as you heard earlier on again from Keith, about making sure that we make sure this industry is seen as exciting. Of course, we've had a very troubling 2015 and quite a hard run up to it for the few years before that with the electricity market reform, Project Transmit and the shifts in policies, but there's only one community that's going to make this industry work in partnership with government, and it's us. So we need to remember we have to attract the talent of the future into this industry. So let me make some quick reflections again and cap Nina's comment about the bonfire of the policies. When Amber Rudd spoke at the end of last year, the Energy Reset speech, we were all listening very carefully. And in a nutshell, not comprehensively, but in a nutshell, the headlines of which were, of course, the UK commitment long-term to nuclear and gas in the short term, but no clear signal for investment, especially in Scotland. No coal by 2025. It was with great sadness that I saw Longannet close last month. My first day in the industry in 1978 was as a young engineer at Longannet, working with the station electricity team. So again, a sad day for Scotland, but again, an indication of the transition of energy to a more low-carbon future. Of course, Amber Rudd also talked about a return to markets, extending the climate change levy to renewables, no large-scale onshore wind support, large reduction in subsidies for solar, and of course withdrawing the funding for the CCS commercialisation competition, which I particularly regretted given the great intellectual capability and world leadership and innovation that we have here in the UK, not least in Scotland, and the pulling back from that was a great disappointment. There was also an end to the Green Deal and cancelling the zero carbon homes requirement. Apart from that, it was a fantastic speech to pick up on. And of course, it then had us think about how we might reset the dial. So, with colleagues from Scottish Government, we started to think about an alternative approach. I think Keith made a very important point, and that is we have to work in some notion of common purpose. Of course, there are things that will turn us off some of the policy details, but it's in working together with government in Westminster, in Holyrood, very importantly in Brussels, that we're going to start defining the future. And with our part of that, as it were, in Scotland, it's about focusing and establishing an energy system strategy. And much of that was woven into what you heard earlier on. It wasn't explicitly brought out, but the whole idea of an energy systems approach developing over the coming decades to give us a stable energy transition. And that's what we must do over the coming decades. It's a transition to a new low-carbon future. Importantly, maintaining a varied energy supply and having a long-term plan consistent with long-term needs. So taking a whole systems view, which I'll elaborate on in a moment, addressing for us here in Glasgow within Scotland today, so let's talk about that, addressing Scotland's supply and demand for energy and integrating our approach to heat, transport and power production. And this is a really exciting development. Julian reflected on that distributed energy journey, something we've been reflecting on for about 20 years now. Back at the start of the 20th century, we had distributed energy systems because that's just the way it was. It wasn't until the 1920s when Lord Weir came up with the idea of creating a grid that we started to integrate large-scale systems. But we have a real economic opportunity now around energy storage and smart energy solutions and reserving, of course, a community stake. The notion of democratisation of energy supply is quite a theatrical one, but it has truth within it. We're getting used to the term trilemma, about balancing out this piece around cost of energy, its security and decarbonising. And clumsier words appearing now, but it still, again, has fact behind it, and that's the quadrilemma, where that fourth corner is about consumer engagement and public acceptability, and that's where the distributed piece and energy systems can play a big accelerating part going forward. Now, let me unpack that just a little bit more. So, with regard to the three objectives within this emerging Scottish energy system strategy, it's about decarbonising energy system supply by 2050, in line with long-term climate change targets, optimising the economic and social return to Scotland. It's 10 years ago this year, ladies and gentlemen, that Nick Stern produced his report that tried to understand the economics of climate change. And here we are now at the opportunity, many of it caused by the burning bridges that we've heard about by some of the other speakers, to create, of course, a decarbonised energy supply, but create economic opportunity into the bargain. Taking that whole system view with a comprehensive policy development is key. That's about energy demand reduction, improved energy efficiency, and having a balanced energy generation mix, something that here in Scotland we need to get used to embracing more explicitly and talking about that openly. And the role for storage, of course, and the requirements of the low carbon transition in transport and heat. And of course, central to that is our journey in renewables also. And as I mentioned earlier, a more localised approach to energy provision is an exciting opportunity going forward. An important set of statistics for you, and it was sobering when I saw these for the first time. Scottish energy consumption. Electricity makes up 21% of our energy consumption. Transport, 25%. And the rest, 54% from heat. You've seen the deck diagrams, the Sankey diagrams that show the energy inputs and outputs. It's important for us to bear in mind how we use energy, how it's produced, and how we can maximise its efficiency. And again, looking at heat, how can we impact there in terms of efficiency, taking a whole systems approach? Well, in heat, we can try and reduce the demand for heat through improving energy efficiency and commitments at the local level, at the city level, such as you heard from Frank McAveety, to provide warmer housing. And that's driven through policy and incentives. Also, to consider low-carbon energy storage, especially using the gas grid. With regard to transport, seeking to introduce lower carbon fuels, another great economic opportunity for Scotland, and moving ultimately to what we call ultra-low emission vehicles, or ULEVs, through battery, hydrogen and fuel cell technology. ULEVs being one of the components of National Grid's own future energy scenario, Gone Green. But of course, we also want to improve system flexibility with the storage technology that we're talking about. So you've heard some key themes this morning, storage being at the heart of it. But of course, in electricity, my own immediate domain, smart grid technology, control and sensing, power electronics, pervasive communications, intelligent distributed software techniques, and of course, distributed network architectures. Much of this thinking was stimulated actually by a colleague of Julian and mine some years ago, a man called John Scott, who when he left National Grid became the technical director at Ofgem. And John drove with the IEE at the time the idea of technical architectures, where we challenged and inverted some of the network architectures that's been with us for over a century. But of course, ultimately, increasing the supply of low-carbon sources, including the renewables you've heard about this morning, to make sure we meet new demands. And again, coming back to systems level, bear this in mind, you'll be hearing a lot more about it, and I hope this conference will be picking this up in years to come. Systems level approaches building up momentum internationally. And Scotland, I am sure, and the UK for sure, can make a significant contribution through an unambiguous commitment to moving towards energy systems thinking, with a commitment from government, industry, and of course academia. Only yesterday, the Energy Technology Partnership, which I have the privilege of chairing, that's the consortium of Scottish universities and energy research, met with our Industrial Advisory Board, chaired by our colleagues from utilities and OEMs. We made a commitment around heat and energy systems, working with our funding partners to create a cohort of PhD students in that space to support government thinking and industrial engagement. We're now already on to our 100th or so PhD student in that programme, and it's the intellectual horsepower that these people bring that's going to feed some of the thinking. And if I plug the ETP, they're on stand K30, go and have a look at them, have a chat to them about what they intend to do in this space. But it's also worthy to note that, as well as the offshore renewable energy catapult that you all know about, that's headquartered here in Glasgow, the UK government set up the Energy Systems Catapult, now chaired by Nick Windsor, ex-National Grid, a catapult that has some great ambitions. The London launch takes place on Monday this week at the IET in Savoy Place. Those of you who are in town, I recommend you go and see it. And of course, this Energy Systems is about the products and services we can drive, dealing with climate change, dealing with the energy challenges, and looking at the integration of electricity, heat, and combustible gases. And this new catapult, you should be aware, and please have a look at their website, has now inherited the Energy Technology Institute's programme on smart systems and heat, aiming to create future-proof and economic local heating solutions for the UK, and developing software models and new heating technologies to enable the design of location-specific energy systems and improved heat efficiency in buildings. So again, there's no magic bullet for addressing low-carbon systems, for that security of supply, for the affordability. It's an integration of these things. Ultimately, the Energy Systems Catapult will be moving many of these propositions to large-scale demonstrations. And Frank, we need to place Glasgow in the middle of that. We have a major set of energy challenges, and I think working with Scottish Government, with the leadership in this city, with our friends in Scottish Enterprise, we need to be presenting ourselves as a place where we can demonstrate these integrated techniques. The Catapult is also developing the Future Power System Architecture project. Again, this was originally commissioned by DEC and involved the IET and the Energy Systems Catapult, looking at future grid technologies and the sort of architectures that Julian and Keith implied in what they were talking about. And we should think, in Scotland, we had some of the earliest deployments of smart grid technology. Strathclyde worked with SSE in deploying these control methods up in Orkney and Shetland to very significantly increase the renewable energy connection capability. And in partnership with ScottishPower and SSE, we have the Power Network Demonstration Centre funded by Scottish Enterprise here in Scotland. Find out about what they're doing. That's about rapid prototyping and acceleration through the technology readiness levels to products and services. Again, back to Nick Stern, and addressing climate change problems, we can create economic opportunity. And last but not least, innovation. Keith stressed that, and I couldn't agree with him more. We need to innovate future architectures, innovate policy interventions, innovate new business models, and we should do it at pace. Again, building the opportunities for job creation, economic growth for this country, in Scotland and the UK more generally, and we can do it through smart grid, low carbon technologies and integration of our heat, transport and energy system policy. So, just moving to a few closing remarks. The development of Scotland's energy systems strategy will require us unambiguously to revisit the analysis of Scotland's future energy profile. Renewables will, of course, remain a central part of that, but of course we're going to have to do that in any case this year under the provisions of the Climate Change Act, so that the Scottish Government and the new government that will be formed post-Thursday, they have to set out coherent plans for emissions reductions, as well as making sure we have secure, reliable energy supplies here and across the UK, and of course the associated energy systems transition that will take us to 2032 and onwards to 2050. And of course this work will begin in 2016, and I'm going to conclude by an encouragement to be paying attention to what will be a series of recommendations and public consultations. So let me conclude in terms of energy systems strategy, and here are the headlines. It's no doubt to me that we need a stable system transition. We're at a cusp of change. It's the same sort of exciting frontier mentality that we have to take in that we had at the start of the 20th century. We need to now rethink, reimagine and rebuild energy systems across Europe and indeed across the globe. So this stable, hopefully, energy systems transition includes encouragement for efficient backup gas generation as a partner to renewables. We have to make sure that all the capacity mechanisms and investments around that have to be in place. Energy storage, a key technology. Power electronics is there, advanced comms, but energy storage is key, both at the local and grid levels, in terms of being an imperative for security of supply. This will require new regulatory treatment, plus continued Scottish planning support through the National Planning Framework. We have to give support for even greater renewable electricity deployment through a refreshed onshore wind policy, addressing repowering opportunity, as you've heard, lifetime extension, and accommodating a subsidy-free regulatory environment, the reality that Keith shared with us earlier. We need new network infrastructure investment. There's a lot going on in Scotland already. The HVDC subsea grid, multiple £billion worth of investment, and the South of Scotland investment, as well as what SSE are doing. So across EU in the next 20 years or so, €600 billion worth of rewiring the continent. But let's make sure we rewire it in a way that allows us to achieve energy systems of the future. Smart grid technology, you've heard a lot of this morning, to permit greater renewable capacity, especially in locally constrained areas. And of course, encouragement for integrated solutions for continued rollout of micro-renewables. And finally, and it's worthwhile saying, promoting innovative localised solutions. Cities like Glasgow can take a lot of credit for having carbon master plans. You heard Frank talking about the Viridor a waste-to-energy scheme. The cities need to take a lot of responsibility. You're hearing time and time again, cities are a driver for economy. We also should be thinking about giving them greater powers to make sure what they can do in energy systems can drive a new future. So let me conclude by saying that later in 2016, the Scottish Government will be going to a number of public consultations to try and share some of the details and propositions that the Energy Advisory Board will be supporting the detail on. I encourage you to engage, have your opinions felt, influence it, and I'm sure Nina and indeed our colleagues in All Energy Conference, I would say that's going to be a major part of this conference's discussion as a real hotspot for next year. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you've sat through a very informative hour and a half plus. Thank you for being patient. And it only falls on me to thank you for your attention and also to thank our panel who've covered every aspect of renewable energy, both international and what we need to do locally here in Scotland. I totally agree with them all that it's up to us who are in the industry to deliver the renewable clean energy future that requires. So in the usual way, could you join me in thanking our wonderful panel? Thank you. And that concludes the session for now, and I think the next session starts at 11 o'clock.